All right, everybody. So today, back on the podcast, we have Jeffrey Verity Schofield. How are you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How you been?
I'm good, man. So we were just talking a little bit about what we're doing in our lives and whatnot, but kind of the bleeding of your passions into your careers and some of the pros and cons with that, right? And this is something ever since I started the podcast, I've had people ask me, do you ever think you'll just do this full time and you'll drop your career? And I've always said, certainly not in my case. I don't really have the interest to do it. It would be probably a poor financial choice for me as well. But even that aside, for me, when it would be all fitness all the time, it I think even like the working out aspect, like we were saying, has almost kind of been poisoned by that, and like it just becomes like you're always on. Everything's got to be documented for your fitness world and everything. But obviously, you do it. Steve Paul does it. Most of the people I've had on podcasts have done it. So how have you kind of balanced that so it doesn't take away your passion?
Well, I've kind of chilled out a little bit because there was a time when I was working 80, 90 hours a week. So, you wake up, you work, and then I would work all morning and then, 2 p.m., go to the gym and then get back at like 4 or 5 and then work until midnight or 1 a.m. or something. And so, I've kind of chilled out a little bit where I'm not trying to get out a video every single day because, for a while I was uploading every single day.
Wow.
And
How long did you do that?
I think it was like a 2 week challenge that I did just for
Okay.
myself. But,
Wow.
even apart from that challenge, it was like 4 or 5 times a week. And um, you can do it in the short term, but it does catch up to you. I think people don't realize how much work goes into a video um, because they might think, oh, yeah, it's like a 10-minute video. It probably took like an hour or two to make.
Right.
But it's a lot more than that. So I've kind of like chilled out a little bit because um, when I don't know, like if there's a gun to your head or your back is against the wall, like you have to, you have that motivation. You know, I guess it's like the wolf at the bottom of the hill is hungrier than the wolf at
Yeah.
the top of the hill or
Right.
towards the top of the hill. But I'm kind of taking a long term approach because I see a lot of channels like blow up and then fall off.
Hmm.
So they have this sort of like 2, 3, 4 year climb, and then they kind of just like go, who
Yeah.
knows? And so I'm taking a more just sort of long
It's
term
it's
approach.
always interesting to see though. I see that a lot, especially on Instagram, maybe even more so than YouTube, although you see it on YouTube as well, where somebody
Yeah,
has a really disproportional number of followers or subscribers compared to, let's say, likes or views. The engagement is way lower. Obviously, there's going to be some instances where somebody just bought the followers and subscribers, but I think
yeah,
in most cases, it's just there was a
it takes
period
off.
where everything, certainly with like cryptocurrency YouTube channels, of course, like you saw
Yeah,
that stuff, but even in the
not doing
fitness
so well
world,
now.
it's just interesting to see that. I'm actually surprised with myself that I've had just obviously I don't have a very big channel, but just it's almost been identical throughout my now 5 years podcasting. Like the views, the growth has been almost identical month to month, which is kind of shocking. But like you, I would rather see that, even if it's at a lower level, than just like a big spike. And then you're almost always trying to chase that next thing. And
Yeah,
kind of goes back to the original topic.
it's the steroids of YouTube views because you
Yeah.
get this big spike early, and then your doctor says you're going to die, and then you got to go off, and then you're always left dreaming of those days when you were 280 pounds or whatever. So I've taken more of a long term approach where I don't even check analytics much anymore. I
Hmm.
mean, I know some people who, and most big channels do this, where they change the title and the thumbnail during the first hour
Oh
because
yeah,
you
I've
can see how
seen.
many views you're getting per minute. And
Yeah,
so you
yeah,
can change the thumbnail, change the title. Oh wow, this one's doing better, and then you can and the video does do better if you do that.
yeah.
Um, you can see, okay, this video popped off. Now I'm going to make 8 more videos with the same thing, right? So I don't really play the YouTube game because it's a shitty game.
Yeah.
It results in worse content, and I find it kind of obnoxious. Um, and I've noticed channels that tend to go down that road, they do better, but the content is worse, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's why there's almost no correlation between the size of a YouTube channel and the quality of the content.
Right.
Maybe it's
Right.
a little bit of correlation, but it's not. It's not that strong. Um, And so, I'm not really in any rush to, hit any big subscriber numbers or anything like that.
Yeah, I think people would be surprised at how much that goes into a video. I mean, even like mine, that's pretty low level with the editing and whatnot. Sometimes I'll look and I say, okay, so my personal goal is I want to have one video a week. That's kind of like the level I'm at. That's what I want to be consistent with, and I've been extremely consistent with that, at least on average. And so when I look at that, I might say, okay, well, just put out a video and it'll be 12 minutes. But it's like, sure, but when you actually consider the recording time and the editing time and getting the thumbnail and all of that. It can be, I mean, I'm sure people who have huge channels with editors, they just talk and then they say, okay, team, take over, you handle it. But if you're doing it yourself, it can be quite involved.
Oh yeah, no, it's because you have to plan it out, and then I don't script it out, but I have like pretty detailed bullet points,
Mm-hmm.
and then I film it in chunks. So I have maybe 15, 20, 25, like 10 to 45-second chunks where I'm talking about one thing, and then I stop the camera, look at the next thing, start it again,
Okay.
same thing, and then stop it. And so it's, I have to fuse all those chunks together, taking out the very beginning and the very end, because no one wants to see me like, stopping the camera and looking at my notes and shit like that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I don't want to waste anyone's time, right? Like I think I've gotten one comment where someone's like, "This video is a waste of time," and I was like, "Oh my!" That was probably the worst comment I've ever got. If I get hate comments, like, all right, well, whatever. But someone's like, I felt like I want my 10 minutes back, and I was like, oh god, no. But that's like the one thing. I don't want to be boring, and I don't want to waste people's time. I don't want obviously help people and have it be informative, and also do no harm. Hippocratic Oath, I think, is a good one for fitness.
Yeah, right.
You say helpful stuff, but also don't hurt people. And so, no maxing out the preacher curl challenge over here.
Yeah, right. That's funny. Yeah, it's interesting. Also, I was going to say that. Right. I was going to say how one of the things that's tougher with my field, but I think also it probably does apply to quote unquote influencer life, at least to some degree, is so like with my job. Unfortunately, there's no real ability to say, okay, let's say I'm just getting really burnt out. I can't just say I'm going to take a month away. Like that's just impossible. Like everything would crumble. I would have employees that it would all go to hell. And because that's not feasible, you kind of just have to deal with it. And you just say, I mean, you can take obviously a week off. You could take some days off. Even if you have to take a week off, though, you really have to make sure there's coverage for emergencies and whatnot. So pros and cons, of course. With fitness, I was going to say that's not the case, but to some degree, it's the case. I mean, you could realistically take a month off and come back and it would be okay. Sure, yeah. But if you took too much time off, people forget about you so quickly. And then the algorithm, right, exactly, you kind of get lost there. So I've seen some instances where people took some time where they just, I wouldn't say they weren't relevant. But if you look at it, maybe like Omar Isuf, Layne Norton, they had periods where they were away and then they did come back. But for a while, they just weren't talked about as much. And you do kind of have to be aware of that as a, again, quote unquote, influencer.
Yeah, no, you have to keep at least a little bit of pressure on the gas. And it's one of those things like, how often have you heard, "Hey guys, I'm back. Like it's been a while."
Yeah.
Because it does burn people out. And it's, it's, I wouldn't say I'm burnt out, but I am cautious of becoming burnt out.
Yeah.
Guess, which might be a sign of being burnt out. I don't know.
Right.
But, I do see it. And I look at other creators and sort of the people who have been creating content for a long time. And most of them are either not uploading very frequently, because I think once you're a slightly bigger channel, especially if you are going to do it all yourself, you kind of have to take a more measured approach where, okay, I'm not going to. And how often have you seen in a channel banner, new uploads every Tuesday and Thursday or something?
Right.
And then like the last upload was 5 weeks ago or something, right?
Yeah.
Like, I see that kind of stuff all the time. So, I kind of have, chilled out a little bit with the uploading. And it hasn't really hurt my views. I would say actually I'm able to put more thought into each video. Because if you commit to 3 days a week, okay, Monday, wow, Monday is here. I have to think about a video and film a video and edit a video while also doing coaching and writing and everything today. And then also going to the gym and also like, oh, I have a wife. Like, oh, wow, that's a thing as well. And so like,
right. Jeff Nippert has done a surprisingly good job of keeping high engagement and view count with
Right.
very sparse uploads.
Yeah, because the quality is there. I think it's one of
Mhm.
those things where, I mean, all of his videos are. You could tell after you make a lot of videos, you could tell how much effort goes
Yeah,
into a video. And
right.
his videos, they're high quality. They're well thought out. And so for me, his videos are an auto click, right? Like if I see the notifications, I see, oh, like Jeff Nippert uploaded, like that's an auto click, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because it is less frequent. Like that's
Right,
part of it. Part of
right.
it is the quality, but part of it is that like, if he was uploading every day, it wouldn't be an auto click.
Yeah, that's true.
It's
Definitely.
because you don't see it that often. And so in some ways it's a way to drive more engagement, but the quality has to be there as well. Otherwise, it'll just be, sort of a downward spiral. So, but even he, I think, has to, I think he is conscious that it can't be like once every 2 months, right? Like,
Yeah.
once every couple weeks is probably okay. But yeah, I think at a certain point, because how often do you get in your YouTube recommended page a creator that you haven't watched in like a really long time?
Right.
Probably
Right.
not that often.
Yeah.
It's a lot more sort of frequency based.
Yeah. So speaking of catchy videos, I've already recorded this video, but it's not edited or anything. Otherwise, I could have sent it to you. But we're going to talk about, did Jeff break the natty limit? So I know Natural Hypertrophy made that video, and I didn't even see his full video because I mostly just wanted to talk about the general concept of it. And then I did watch your video on it, so then I saw his clips and whatnot. So just initial thoughts. Do you think you broke the natty limit, Jeff?
Well, it's almost like a theoretical thing because if you did break the limit, then it wasn't your limit, and so like you didn't break it, right? So it's like everyone is going to have their own theoretical natural limit. I said this in the video where it's like if you did everything perfectly, drug free from birth, you would plateau somewhere, right? Like there would be a point where the gains you're making are so imperceptible that you're essentially done. Like when you're gaining half a pound a year or something, or a quarter of a pound a year, I mean, you'd have to be very, very diligent to even see that. And other people won't be able to see that. Right? Like how often have you seen a natural bodybuilding transformation where the guy's like, I put on 2 pounds in the last 5 years, and someone's like, well, which one's the before? Is it the left or the right? Like,
Right,
and
right.
so a layman can't even see that amount. Even if you're peeled, it's really hard to see. And so if you're not even making visible gains, are you making progress? Like it's one of those things where, yeah, I think after like 15 to 20 diligent years, yeah, it's just pretty much just mathematics. And I think most people are so far away from that when I hear natty limit, I'm like, okay, well, you're not really, you don't even know the basics. Like,
Yeah, right.
stop asking me about the natty limit. I mean, most of the people asking me about it are beginners. So it's
Yeah.
like they're trying to see where they could be before they get there, or even close to that.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
And
for sure.
I understand that because lifting is a pretty big investment of time and effort and energy, etc. And possibly money, if you got my books. But also, but you can't predict where you're going to be. And so I never, even with clients, they're like, how much muscle can I gain in the 3 months? Well, I don't, there's no
Yeah.
way to tell. Even if you got your DNA sequence, I don't think you could like, it's a 7.6, you're a 7.6 pound guy. Yeah.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah. That's what you're going to do. Because a lot of it is completely unknown. A lot of it is out of, the hands of a coach. And so you kind of just have to go in and give it your best shot and keep iterating. And I do think that iterative process can be a way to make your gains more linear than they should be, right? Because I have made better progress in the last 2 years than you would think based on my picture from, 2 years ago when I had been lifting for 6 years.
Right.
Because I, didn't have great training before, right? Like I was still training hard, but there are a lot of things that you can do to dial it in and keep making good progress even when you think you're done. And I think that's where a lot of people are. like they plateau. Okay, you're plateaued on 5.5 hours of sleep. Okay, well, that's expected, right? Like, why would you be making progress
Yeah, right.
on 5.5 hours of sleep? Oh, you're plateaued, and you don't even know what a double progression is, or like, your just basic knowledge is not really where it should be. Or you see their technique, or even their effort, or their proximity to failure, and so, man, there's so many facets that can be improved, and not even optimized. I think that's where another thing where people get trapped in, where it's like everything has to be perfect. No, it has to be better than it used to be, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully that's getting towards perfect. But like the limit, you're never going to get there. You're just trying to be better than you were before.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot to touch on there. I think it is interesting when you see some of the more advanced people. And I brought up an example before where there was a Brian Whitaker, and I think he's a great example of a really impressive natural bodybuilder. But he had this before and after picture. I believe it was 2 years. And I was probably a teenager at the time. So I was showing it to my mom for whatever reason. And she literally did not believe me that it was a different picture until I showed her that the background was different. And then she's like, okay. But I mean, she just thought it was identical pictures. But I think, you or I could see it's like, no, there's like this little, see that one vein is a little different and like this and that.
The lat pokes out.
Yeah, a little bit more. Right,
Right.
right. But I am surprised at how many people message me either for training or just questions saying, well, I think I'm starting to be maxed out and I'm 4 years into it. And it's just like, dude, like, there's no way. I mean, don't get me wrong. You are going to make most of your gains in those first 5 to 7 years for most people, I think. But I know, Jeff, you're maybe a little bit, I don't want to say a complete counterexample there, but in your case, you said that your training wasn't ideal. And so that's a factor too. I do believe if somebody was doing things, again, quote unquote, optimally or very well, they covered 90, 95% of the bases, right? I think and I should also add the caveat that you're at the right age developmentally. Like I've given myself an example. I started at 12 to 14. Doesn't matter how good my training is. I'm not going to be maxed out at 18. It's just not going to happen. But if you are 18 to 20, I do think you can probably make most of your progress within the first 5 to 7 years, just from a total muscle mass. If you think of all the muscle that you could gain in your life, above 50% of that for sure would be in that first, let's say, 5, 7 years. But
yeah, I think it's reasonable.
I think a lot of progress can still be made afterwards. And I've almost been surprised by certain examples. I mean, when I met Steve Hall, that was, well, now 5 years ago, and he was already, I want to say he was 8 years into lifting at that point. And you look at him now compared to then, I mean, it's a different person. Abel as well. I mean, Abel's made really good progress over the last few years. And he was, I think, also similar with the timeline. And then you at 6 or 7 years compared to you at, what, 9 years now?
I hit 9 years at the start of this month.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, all really good examples of that.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where, to be clear, my training wasn't that bad.
Right.
Right. Like I was still, 6 years into lifting, this was 3 years ago, I was already in the fitness industry. I was already, writing on Quora. I'd already started the YouTube channel. And so, I knew a lot about training and, I've always known how to push myself. It was just more directing that effort in a more economical manner and just, getting more out of the effort that I was putting in. And so, my training was still, and like I had a decent physique, 3 years ago, right? Like I was still, I think I was, when I was roughly 10% body fat, I was, I think about 84 kilos, 85 kilos maybe. And that's like 180, 185-ish at 6 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And then now this time when I was 10%, I was roughly 90 kilos, I would say, maybe 89. So, roughly maybe 195, 197-ish. So I put on about 10 extra pounds of muscle, I would say, over 3 or 4 years. And that is very visible, right? Because especially if you're comparing to other naturals, which is part of the reason why I think a lot of actual naturals really dislike fake naturals.
Yeah.
Because they can just, wow, like I was elite until this motherfucker, this guy came
Right.
in here and it was just like, you know, he got to this level so much further because, it's not an even playing field. But if you go from like, let's say an 85th percentile of jacked to a 95th percentile of jacked, I mean, that's a big difference. And then every little percentile that you go up is, an even bigger difference visually.
Sure.
And so, if you think about it in terms of FFMI, fat free mass index, 22 to 23, you're pretty jacked. 23 to 24, okay, wow, now you're really jacked. And as you get closer to 25, wow, now you're like ridiculously jacked. And
That's
then,
what I was going to bring up actually, because I just pulled up an FFMI calculator, and
I
we all
knew
know
you
the flaws with it. But I wanted to see, so I just put mine in, and mine's not. I mean, like I said, I'm not really even close at all, obviously, to that 25. I mean, I'm really in like between the 22 to 23 range.
Yeah.
So let's see, you're 6 feet.
Yeah, 6 feet. I think we're the same height, which makes, I think Abel is also 6 feet.
I'm an inch
So,
taller, Jeff. All right, don't
oh,
take
you're
that
6'2".
away.
Oh, damn it. Well, actually, that's good for me because,
So wait, are you 6 or 6'1"?
I'm 6 feet. My last three physicals were 183, 183 and a half, 184. And 183 is 6 feet. So I just round down to 6 feet. I'm the only guy who rounds down
Yeah,
six
right,
feet.
right. Yeah, I'm 6'1" and maybe like an eighth of an inch. So I just say 6'1". I'm
Okay,
holding
so
on to it while I can.
but I got the hair, so I think I
Yes,
probably have it.
exactly. Pop that up. Okay, so let's say 6 feet, and then so the one thing I will also add with FMMI is that supposed 25 limit is supposed to be around 10% body fat. So
Right.
people should know that, like, if you're like, well, I'm at 27. Well, if you're 30% body fat, that's a whole different story. Like the whole idea of that 25 was at 10%. So do
Right.
you know roughly what you would be at 10% weight wise?
I think this past cut, I was roughly 89 to 90 kilos.
All right, let's just say
Let's just say
89. Yeah.
89. 90 kilos is 198. So probably like let's just say 195 to be conservative. Because I try to be conservative with body fat percentages.
Yeah.
Um,
So okay, so you'd be at like a 24 FFMI.
Yeah.
So and that's one of the things I think I might have mentioned in the video that I made, and maybe at some point we'll get. I don't know if we've had you, me, Natural Hypertrophy, and Alex on together. I don't think we've done all of us, but
I'm sure.
but anyway, yeah, that might be a good one afterwards. But so you're at 24, and that's one of the things that Steve Shaw brought up. Steve Shaw has been very complimentary to you and Alex and said, hey, this is possible and whatnot. But it's like, look, you're still, I mean, I'd have to put in, let's see, how many pounds away. So
10
you'd
to
be
15, probably.
you'd have to be 205 to hit
10 times.
25. So
Yeah.
even as amazing as your progress has been, and you're clearly an outlier, after all that, you are still 10 pounds away at the same body fat, which it's not mean. So you could maybe gain 10 pounds of lean body mass if you also gain 20 pounds of fat with it, right?
Yeah.
But to gain 10
I'm
pounds
doing that now.
yeah, right. So 10 pounds of muscle at the same body fat for somebody who's already an outlier.
Yeah.
That's why, I mean, look, are there examples of somebody like I was actually thinking about this with Layne Norton again? People, one of the things I brought up with natural hypertrophy, saying that he believes there's this almost change in the natural community, and we're seeing more and more of these things. And I said, I don't know if that's really the case. I think he's been around the game almost as long as I have. Ever since I've been in this, I've seen naturals or people who I believe are naturals with 18-inch arms. I mean, Layne Norton has 18-inch arms, I believe, in the off season. There's Jeff Alberts, 18-inch arms in the off season. So there are a lot of guys who have been impressive for a very long time. And I don't know what Jeff's FFMI was, but I think Layne's would be probably close to 25 plus. But in any case, still 10 pounds of muscle for you away. That's a lot. I mean, even with your progress, you'd still be looking at years and years from that before you could
Probably
say,
4 or 5 years.
yeah, before you've broken the quote unquote limit. So I don't think most people should have a limiting mindset, but also realistically, most people will never hit 25 plus.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I hear, the only time I ever hear someone who is like, oh, I'm more than 25 FMI, but I don't look that jacked, they really fudge the body fat percentage.
Right, for sure. Yeah, there's no way you could not look jacked. at
Yeah,
25.
like exactly. They're like, I'm 27 FFI, but I don't want that jacket. I'm like, what's going on over here? But you have like the world's largest pancreas or some shit. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. Um, your pancreas and a wheelbarrow next to you or something like
Right.
this doesn't make sense. The world's largest heart.
There you go. Right.
So
Yeah.
someone who's like, I'm probably like 15% body fat. Sir, you're 28% body fat. I'm going to need you to rerun.
Everybody is 15%. It's always 15%. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because higher than that, I blame men's health, to be perfectly honest. I've seen so many articles where they're like, this guy got down to 1% body fat. And it's like,
yeah,
okay,
right.
11 or 12%. Come on.
Yeah.
And so
sure.
they've been I've actually considered making a video about this. I don't know if we'll be sued or not. I haven't been sued yet, actually. It'd be fun. But they have consistently pretty trash content, especially with body fat percentages. And it goes back to that whole what is popular is not good, and what is good is sometimes not
Does
popular.
Men's Health have a YouTube channel? I've never really looked.
They do. It's mixed. I'll be gracious and say it's mixed. So some good,
1.34 million subscribers.
Yeah, a lot not so good.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I think I think it is cool to see people who have been making progress for such a long time. I just think natural hypertrophy and I have talked several times about the balance between putting out messages that are the most helpful versus the most true. And I think that's just a very interesting topic. But I lean towards his argument in that, most people don't need to hear the whole genetics thing. Most people don't need to hear some of those things. So I totally get it. I do understand the argument.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it matters. But I think people often use it as an excuse and often hyper focus on that. Like I was watching this other content creator who I won't name because I like their content overall. And it's like every other sentence they said, like, your diet and your training will determine your results. And then of course genetics. And it was like every sentence, everything was like, here's a bench press, and this is good bench press after a year, but it also depends on your genetics. I'm like, wow, every sentence you have to qualify the genetics thing. And I think at a certain point, if someone has, just average genetics, they're going to use that often as a way out. Like, oh, I didn't get results, and it was because of this. Well, maybe, it's gonna shift your results, but often people are doing a whole bunch of other stuff that is actually shifting the results the way that they want. But because all of that stuff requires thought and consistency and energy and effort and actually thinking about the process, well, it's a lot easier just to say, well, genetics, and then, give up and go do something else, or, just happily become a lifetime intermediate, that kind of stuff. So I do understand NH's perspective, and I try to err on the side of optimism, but, I'm never going to like promise anything for anyone because I just don't know.
Yeah.
So when you're making general videos, it's tough. It's tough because, when I have a client and they have a specific goal, I know if it's reasonable or if it's just not going to happen, or rarely if it's, too low. If someone's like, they've been lifting a couple of years and they're like, I want to put on 5 pounds of muscle in a year. I'm like, yeah, like, hell yeah, we could do that. That's very reasonable.
Yeah.
But if it's like 30 pounds, I've seen something like that. Someone wants to, they're 30% body fat, super out of shape. They're like, in a year, I want to be 10% body fat.
Right.
The same weight. And I'm just thinking like, okay.
Yeah.
Let's math some math here.
Yeah. And, right.
This is exactly what you're asking. You don't know what you're asking.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I don't even think this is possible with drugs. So
I definitely get the caveats, because being on a podcast or making videos, you realize that every sentence you say can be scrutinized. And because of that, I've noticed I almost have a hard time speaking now without qualifying statements, because I just want to just say, okay, I understand this is based on that and that and that. And it's almost an annoying way to converse, but you kind of have to do it to some degree. But I think the main thing is, as long as your audience understands those principles, then I think it could just not be brought up that much. Like, imagine if you were watching like a a finance channel or something. And I'm not somebody who's big into talking about like, your privilege and all that stuff. But let's just say you're watching this and every sentence they said, okay, you want to do this investment. Oh, but by the way, it's like really based on your privilege. And if you're in a third world country, like this isn't going to work for you. It's like, yeah, I get it. If I was, born somewhere where I'm, paying with stones, this is not going to work. Like, I get it. I don't need to hear that every sentence. Can I just get on to like the meat here of how to, in this case, have my investments?
Right. That's why the biggest channels often they don't spend a lot of time with that kind of qualifying language because most people don't want to really hear that. And it's not even that it's, annoying or that it requires more thought. It just like spreads out the content that you get.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like something could take a minute to talk about. And now it's like 3, 4, 5 minutes because of all these,
Totally.
Oh, but it depends on this and this and this.
Yep.
It's almost like the evidence-based sort of the meme of it depends.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You need the nuance, but you don't want to just constantly talk about the nuance.
Yeah. So I try to strike a balance of that. And I think for me, a good guideline is if the video ends up being over 20 minutes, then I try to chop some stuff out.
Yeah.
If it's under 10 minutes, well, then I probably should have combined it with something else or gone into more depth or something. Yeah. And they almost always end up being 10 to 20 minutes without even trying, just because that's, I don't know, maybe based on practice, that's just how long I end up talking for, pretty much.
I think it's a very digestible amount for a single topic. Every once in a while, I'll have something that goes longer or shorter, but 10 to 20 is pretty good. Do you feel that this is, I think I just saw Basement Bodybuilding, Landon from Basement Bodybuilding talk about this, and he was saying that he believes a lot of the training, I don't want to say ideologies, but some of the focus in training has been skewed by competitive bodybuilding. And I think in his example, he was saying that he thought forearm work was really important, maybe even more than leg work for some people. I don't want to take it out of context, but basically to say, and I agree with that overall message. I mean, we've talked about Greg O'Gallagher, Kino Body a little bit, and people could say he's got kind of skinny legs and maybe he doesn't do lots of squats and deadlifts and whatnot, but the guy has got a physique that a huge proportion of the population would like, and I'm sure almost any high schooler or those in college would love to have. So there's a reason that gets a lot of attention, and even that's not maybe Landon's target audience, but I would say that most people focus more on upper body and stuff. So do you think that there's been a skew because of the bodybuilding content?
I think, potentially. I watched your episode with Greg. I think it was a while back.
Yeah.
And he seems like a really good guy. It's just that his marketing is it's something.
Right.
So and he's legit strong, and I would say you'd be hard pressed to find someone who wouldn't want to swap physiques with him. Right.
Yeah.
And so he looks great, and it's one of those things where maybe it's from powerlifting because powerlifting is sort of a lower body dominant endeavor, just squat and deadlift. That's going to be 80% of your total, 75% of your total, depending on the bench or the ratios, etc. I mean, but there are people out there who they have a poverty bench and they're very, very good powerlifters.
Yeah,
because powerlifting it's a hip and knee extension contest. That's essentially what it is. There's technique involved. Obviously, I'm not cheapening it. Don't come after me, okay? But it's very lower body dominant, especially if someone is pulling sumo. And so, it's I think for a lot of people, they don't want huge quads or huge hamstrings. I think they look cool. I'm not going to stop training them by any means, especially if you want to maximize that FFMI.
Right.
Those are the biggest muscles in the body. But for the average person, I think sometimes they have this guilt over skipping leg day, or even just like only training legs once a week. I can't tell you how many people I've had, clients or otherwise, where they're like, so can I just train legs once a week? Like, is that okay? And I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't it be okay?
Right.
Like, well, I know I've heard you need like frequency to maximize it. I'm like, well, do you want to maximize that? Like, yeah, I have to maximize everything. No, you don't. no one, I mean, it's people who, it's that same mindset of like reaching your full muscular potential. You don't have to do that either, right?
Yeah.
Like I get these DMs from people who are like, so how long is it going to take me to get to this FMI? I have to do this because I want to look like this and this guy. I'm like, wow, you're like way off in terms of like what you should be focusing on.
Right.
Like, what about enjoying lifting? Right? Like that's what I've been doing this past few months as well after the cut. Um, like I post my training on Instagram with stories, and a couple people were like, why are you doing this exercise? Like biomechanically, this is
Yeah. Yeah.
devastatingly bad. And I'm like, yeah, I just like it. And they're like, what do you mean you just like it?
What is
Yeah,
that?
I just enjoy it. They're like, and they just wouldn't fucking understand. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it in simple. I just like it. They're like, so it's not optimal. I'm like, yeah, so it's not optimal. Why are you doing it? Because, and it was just this circular
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
that I just gave up. I didn't block them. It's tempting, but sometimes I just do training because I like it. Or I wanted to do seated barbell press, and there's one rack at the gym, and people were using it, and so I was like, I'll just do something else. I'll do a machine or do something else. And so, I think a lot of people should probably start from the enjoyment side of things
Yeah.
and, progress towards something more serious. Whereas people start super serious and then they don't even seem to enjoy it at all. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking like, what a waste.
Yeah, I think it's a huge factor because I mean, if you look at Brian Borstein and his physique when he was doing CrossFit, I mean, he was like 90 plus percent of the way there. We just with CrossFit, and the enjoyability is huge. I mean, these days, if I think of when do I enjoy working out the most, it's honestly when I go on vacation and I just go to the gym and just do what I want. I'm not focusing on the PR. I'm just picking some machines that I enjoy. I'm getting a pump. I mean, I'm still training hard. Sometimes I'll be going with friends and like that's always fun, but there's not this like I have to beat this thing with the optimal exercise because I probably would if I was doing long term have I don't know if you'd call it guilt that I'm doing something that's maybe not ideal, but if I'm just on vacation or everything, I just enjoy it and like I don't know how else to describe it other than I enjoy what I'm doing there. I'll just put my headphones in, I get into my space, and that doesn't have to be. It's not like it's not doing anything. It's still doing 90% of what I want it to do.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's where I've been. That's been a big part of like how I've been training the past few months. And like, has it been perfect? No. Like, I can definitely see instances where it's like I knew I would have progressed better on a movement if I had it in more consistently.
Yeah.
Because I do seem to need more time with a specific movement to see progression, and I do thrive on frequency. And so, I can tell that it's not the ideal setup, but after like the 6 month cut and just going super, super hard, especially near the end, like I kind of just wanted to go in and do whatever.
And what are you up to now, weight wise?
216, 218.
Okay, I'm catching up, man. I'm about 205 right now, so watch out.
Yeah, I'll probably go. I was like, I don't know if I should go to 250 or 350. And 350 seemed a bit high, so I think I'll just go to
250 would look good on you.
350 would be. That would be. I'd have to buy a lot of new clothes.
I think 250 though, you could probably maintain your body fat, maybe even drop it a little bit while you go up there. So you just get like a nice recomp up to 250 probably. With 350, you might need a small surplus. So
yeah, if I go slowly, because I mean, the last 3 bulks, I think 2019, I hit 212. In 2021 into 2022, I hit 218 ish, and then the last bulk I hit 223, 224. So realistically, I'll probably end up at like 230 ish.
Wow.
Yeah. 250 is a bit optimistic, I think. And I do think that there's a bit of trade-off for health being 230.
Yeah.
I think even if you're in good cardiovascular shape, from a longevity perspective, you don't see many centenarians, 100-year-old had my first,
Centenarians, yeah.
who are 230. I don't know
No,
any. They're all like,
no.
most of them are women,
Yeah,
first of all. And then most of them are very light. And I think they're all
yeah,
pretty short too. They're just small bodied people. And that's part of, I think, what is good for longevity.
for
Um,
sure. Yeah, I got my grandma Maconi is turning 100 in let's see, 3 months, three,
oh,
four
nice.
months. So yeah, she's not thin. It's just actually a
Okay.
kind of like obese Italian woman, not
Oh,
like
wow.
morbidly obese, but like a pretty hefty Italian woman. No
Good genes.
exercise, but a lot of olive
Wow.
oil, right? So no, but I mean, I don't think there's much debate that obviously genetics are a huge factor
Genetics.
when it comes to
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
um, but yeah, it's very interesting when you look at lifespan because bigger animals tend to live longer. Like as far as
Yeah.
species, right? Bigger
Sure.
species live longer than really tiny species, and
Yeah.
yet within the species, yes, like within humans,
Yeah.
smaller humans certainly are the ones that are living longer. And part of that, obviously, the older you get, the more things are going to atrophy, and you just kind of shrink. But
Yeah.
even that aside, just even if you were to correlate overall size, like there's no way Hafthor Bjornsson is going to be 95.
Yeah.
Like it's just not happening.
Yeah. He'll be very lucky to make it. I mean, it's kind of morbid, but if he hit 80, I'd be impressed.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
same.
just, I think it's just a numbers thing. And so this is one thing where I hear the line of don't focus on if you're natural, focus on health. And then they'll point to someone being, in some elite natural bodybuilder getting up to like 230 or 240 in the off season and say like, oh, do you think this is healthy? Well, it's probably not as good for longevity as if they didn't bodybuild and they, weren't as heavy in terms of the muscle and maybe getting up there and, into the high teens or maybe even low 20s in body fat percentage. But if they took steroids, they'd be way less healthy.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
almost like arguing two different things. And it's this sneaky fucking tactic that pisses me off, where it's like, don't focus on if you're natural, focus on health. And then, take these supplements along with the drugs to make sure you're healthy. Boom. Now they're
yeah,
making money on both sides of it, right? The anabolics and also the liver support and the kidney support and all the support. I'd rather take no support at all. Thank you very
yeah,
much.
yeah.
You can keep all that shit away from me.
I would
As a
wonder
video.
though, and I don't know if there's any research. I mean, there certainly wouldn't be any direct comparison research here, but obviously, when you say steroids, that's a huge umbrella, right? And we don't know dosages or anything like that. But
Yeah.
I do think some people just kind of, they kind of wave away the fact that increased body weight and long periods of a surplus are not really that healthy for long periods of time. I mean, some people will be so I can't tell you how many friends I've had where they bulked up to, maybe just in like the low 200s, but it was outside of where their body, I hate to say, quote unquote, wanted to be. And they had blood pressure issues and
Yeah.
maybe
Oh,
potentially
yeah.
cholesterol issues and everything. Now I have one client who's 350 pounds and his cholesterol is good. So it's going to vary a lot. But if you were to say, hey, twin A is going to bulk up naturally, but go to like 240 and 25% plus body fat, and he's going to do that for years, versus
Big
twin
boy.
B is going to stay at a lean 180, but let's say he's on super TRT, right? Maybe he's on 250 milligrams of testosterone a week.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that that latter person is going to be less healthy. And I don't know.
Yeah. No, I would agree.
Yeah, like at what dose does that lighter, leaner, maybe more cardiovascularly active person become, more unhealthy than the heavier natural? I don't know, but it's not
Yeah.
so clear cut just because you're natural, you're healthy.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. And I think there is some hypocrisy um, where someone's like, I'm natural for health reasons. And then you look at their diet and, well,
Yeah, or it's like
you
I'm
really
vegan
care about health.
for health reasons, and then
Yeah,
just take
exactly.
Oreos, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but then again, like that can also be twisted where someone sees you eating like one cookie and they're like, but you said you're natural for your health. Well, it's like, that can be
Sure.
realistically like what's going to be worse for your health, like the occasional indulgence or, running cycles of anabolic steroids. So it's like,
Yeah.
I think it's just the dose makes the poison. And the dose can be a high body fat percentage. The
Right.
dose can be, from your diet. Actually, the Chinese have a saying, "Bing Tong Ko Ru," and Bing is disease, Song is from, Ko is your mouth, and Ru is to enter. So disease enters from the mouth,
Mm.
which, I mean, makes sense because your diet, it can either be medicine or it can be a pretty bad poison. And so, yeah, it really just does depend on the dosage of what you're taking in. I actually saw some guy on a podcast. I forget his name, Brian something, where he's basically committed his body to science, and he wants to live to 120 years old. And so he's
Is
taken
it
like,
this is this like the billionaire dude?
yeah, he's super rich.
Yeah, and him and his son and his like dad are doing it or something like that, right? I just
Yeah,
heard about this.
he's the dad, and his sons. He's trying to be as young as his sons, and he's like in his late 40s. His
Okay.
sons are
Yeah.
like 17 and 19.
Yeah, yeah.
He has like 100 pills when he wakes up every day, and he's on a 2,000 calorie diet, and he said he was 3% body fat, which I'm not sure. No, he said he was 5% body fat. He's gone up and he's got a little fatter, but I mean, his face was you can tell when someone is very lean. Like right now, I'm not lean and you could see it, but he was like, I mean,
Yeah.
you could see the cheekbones, you could see all the details in like the temple and everything. So you could tell he was very, very lean. You could see like the muscles in his throat that don't really come out until you're
Right.
well under 10%. So yeah, I don't know if he was 5%, but he was close enough that it's, irrelevant. And he said, I'm hungry all the time because he's constantly in a deficit because he wants to live as long as possible.
Yeah. Brian Johnson looks like.
Yeah, that's what it was. And so it was very informative. But I don't necessarily want to maximize longevity. My life would be very different. My training would be very different. My diet would be very different. Because I think at a certain point, if you want to maximize muscle mass, yeah, you are sacrificing longevity. I don't think you're necessarily sacrificing the health in the years that you have, but you might be chopping off some of those years at the end.
Yeah.
And of course, if you bulk up in an extreme way, I mean, yeah, you might be, asking for diabetes or high blood pressure or something. My blood work is pretty good overall, and so I'm not too worried about it. But just because my blood work is good at 97 kilos, so 215-ish, 214, that doesn't mean it's going to be good at 230. I think that extra weight can definitely happen.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than this was probably one of the flaws with people who were heavy in anabolics is, obviously the worst case was that they weren't checking things at all. But then blood work was talked about a lot, and it's like, okay, that's a big step in the right direction for sure. But then, there's other things besides just things that are not going to get picked up in blood work, or at least not picked up until things are pretty far gone. So, just something to be aware of.
Yeah. Or it's like people say, yeah, I got my blood work. And I'm like, okay, so like, what was your HDL, LDL? Like, they're like, they don't know.
Yeah. Right. Doctor said it was fine.
I got it. Yeah. You have to get it and also check it and like actually know what it actually is. And so, yeah, there are people who they get their blood work and they just, they got it. They check that off the list, but
yeah, I would not trust that your doctor is necessarily going to, I've seen numerous examples where doctor just said, oh, no, yeah, it's fine. And it's like, dude, this is maybe not egregious, but I would not say this is fine.
Yeah. Especially if you see something like as a lifter, you should be healthier than the average person.
Right.
So sometimes like the normal range is like, okay, I guess you're barely in the normal range for this. But like, do you really want to be barely in the normal range? Especially if you're in the process of bulking or something, or especially if you're getting towards like 40 or 45 or something. So it's like,
I assume you've tested testosterone at least once.
I never have.
Never have. Oh, wow. Okay. It's interesting how much, like, again, we see some examples. I know Layne Norton and Doug Miller have both talked about how their levels are top of the normal range, maybe even a little bit above the normal range. But then you look at somebody like Brian Borstein, and his is low normal. Yeah, I think his was in the 300s, maybe 400s. And like mine's never been terribly high. So it is interesting because the study, I remember James Krieger had talked about that every 100 nanograms per deciliter correlated with about half a kilogram, so about 1 pound of muscle. So you could think, okay, so if your levels are 400 and you got them up to 900, maybe that would be 5 pounds more muscle. But, again, when you look at some of these naturals, there could be 20 or 30 pounds of variation.
Yeah.
So it's certainly not,
Yeah,
I wouldn't even say
stuff.
mostly testosterone.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. And I certainly have had DMs from people who are like, how high is your testosterone? And I just said, I've never gotten to test it. They're like, oh, it must be high. And I'm just like, well, maybe, like, I don't know. I assume it's, I mean, at this point, I don't even want to make any assumptions because like, I mean, it could be 300, it could be 1,000. I mean, I don't think there's really any way to know for sure.
No.
I don't think it's like, oh, but I have a deep voice or like, oh, I have facial. Like, I don't think those are really going to be necessarily indicators of like, of anything really. And I also don't think, like propensity to grow muscle, there might be some correlation, but like, there's people who don't even lift who have high testosterone levels, I'm sure. And people who probably have a fit diet and they just don't even care, and they're a teenager or whatever, or early 20s, and they have like, they're walking around with 1,200 or something. Like, it doesn't even make sense. But that doesn't mean they're going to have good genetics to build muscle, right? Like maybe, but again, I think that 1 pound per 100 kind of makes sense. But it definitely doesn't explain everything.
Yeah,
for sure.
How are you doing with the cardiovascular health? I know at one point, maybe a year ago, we had talked about, because it used to be, for people who don't know, you were, decently high level cardiovascular athlete. I think were you doing cross country or you were doing more like
just
track?
Running. Yeah, running. I was doing track, and then I was kind of just doing my own thing.
Okay.
Like I never really enjoyed competing. I competed a few times, but I always like dramatically underperformed. Like I signed up for one meet, and then I tore my hamstring like a week before. And so I was limping around the track, and I still ran like a 55, 400 meters.
Wow.
Which is not great, but it's not terrible. And so, I never reached my potential in any kind of performance or competition. So it's almost like I benched 4 or 5 back in high school kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't have any proof of like, and I have all, I don't even have my old logs anymore. They're on my old computer. But I was fast, but not world class. And that's what I always compared myself to. And so I just figured if I wasn't running like a 350 mile, like why fucking bother basically? Which sounds silly, but like that was just.
It does sound silly. I'll just tell you.
It sounds. I realize it sounds silly, but that was just like the mentality that I had, right? Because with the times I was running, which again I won't mention because it'll just sound silly.
Just tell us, Jeff. Everybody's wondering now. Let's hear it.
Yeah. I whenever I talk about it, I get people messaging me like saying like, oh, what could you do for a 5K or something? And I have some pretty distinct ideas that I won't share with anyone because, again.
What about your best mile time? You want to share that?
Well, my best in competition. Well, it's silly because I competed in high school. And then I trained for like 6 or 7 years after high school.
Okay.
Until I was 25 and I started lifting. And so I think my best mile in high school was maybe like 4:55. And then a few years later, I'm doing like 8 and 10 milers at that pace. So it's like things progressed a lot from there.
So what you're saying is you could break the 4-minute mile.
That was a goal of mine, but I never hit it.
Yeah.
Because like there's no point in running a 4-minute mile, on a dirt road somewhere in the middle of nowhere and then measuring it on a satellite imagery.
Right.
What's the point? And so I have some ideas about, based on track workouts, roughly where I was. But again, different life.
Yeah. It'd be so interesting to me to see what you or Steve Hall, so for people who don't know, Steve Hall was a runner and I think a pretty decent runner as well. If you guys were to do that now, at your bulked up state, I'm sure you would still have a surprisingly good performance for your weight, but obviously a much worse performance, than it used to be.
Yeah, it's like when I I think I ran. Um, I could still run 6 minutes now.
Wow.
I know I could for sure, and it would probably piss off my body because I haven't been running that much. But
Yeah.
I know, like gun to my head, I could run a 6 minute mile, even without much specific running training because I'm still doing the bike and the incline treadmill, and there's a stair stepper now at the gym which I've been using. Plus, it's just the muscle memory,
Yeah.
right? It's just like I've ran thousands of miles under 6 minute pace, so the body just remembers. It takes a little while sometimes. Like
Yeah.
it'll
Yeah.
take a quarter of a mile, half a mile to like find my legs under me, but like I could still. And at the end of the cut, I would say I actually ran a few treadmill workouts, and I would say I was probably in 5:20 to 5:30 shape, somewhere around that.
Oh, and you recently?
When at the end of the cut, so
Oh, at
when
the
I
end of
was
the
like
cut. Okay.
when I was like 190 ish or so.
Okay. And that was on the treadmill, you said.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, maybe some treadmills are calibrated incorrectly, but I have to assume because it was on multiple treadmills as well. So
Yeah.
I have to assume it's pretty accurate.
Right. Well, let's see. So you were 5:25, 30. At the end of my cut, I did a 6 minute mile, which means if I trained for it, I could have done 5:30, which means if I lost a little bit more weight, I could get like 4:30. So I'm like right there with you, buddy.
Yeah, that checks out. I don't,
Yeah. Yeah.
no disagreements there.
So what's your current cardio training? And is it mostly for health or is it just because you enjoy it?
A mixture. Yeah, just both. Before, I mean, when I was a runner, it wasn't for health at all. In fact, it was uh, maybe not the most healthy because I would just train myself into the ground. I think a lot of high level endurance athletes, it's not healthy, right?
Oh,
Like when you
no.
see these guys running, pounding out 100, 150 mile weeks,
No, no, definitely not
that's
healthy.
not, yeah, that's not healthy either orthopedically or even cardiometabolically or
Cardiovascular.
even from a
Yeah.
body composition standpoint,
Yeah.
right? Like you see these guys where, sure, the genetic elite can stay lean doing that, but a lot of them have just this sort of this perma layer of cortisol induced fat
Yeah.
around them,
Yeah. Right.
or maybe water retention, but they probably get leaner if they stop running and focus more on their diet. And I've experienced that. And it sounds ridiculous to the average person, but it's just so much activity. It makes you hungry. It just puts you in this state of stress, especially if you're doing it in the heat and stuff. It's just, you're permanently dehydrated and stuff. Um, and so before it wasn't for health at all. It was just, you know, partly enjoyment, but partly just obsession. Um, and then now it's more just still enjoyment, but more towards health. Like health wasn't even a consideration before, but now I'm 34 and 34 and a half actually. And, so I think in your 30s is a good time to kind of get your shit together and focus on health. Cause I can rely on my history as a runner for performance,
Yeah.
but I don't think I could necessarily rely on that decade I had of training for health going forward. I don't
Oh,
think
yeah,
it's like,
definitely not.
oh yeah, he was a runner before, and my body's like, we're good to go. No, I
No,
think you
no.
have to stay on top of it. And I also don't think lifting is enough. Even high rep, lower body training, it'll get your heart rate up, but then it goes right back down again. So I don't
Yeah.
think they're really quite the same
Milo
benefits.
Wolf and I were just talking about that too, because he's kind of,
Yeah, I saw that.
he kind of believes it's not necessary to do dedicated cardio.
Yeah,
I don't
about
know. I understand the studies with the step count and whatnot, but I always try to think, okay, if somebody came to me and asked, like, for people who say, hey, if you want to maximize squats, you only need to squat one time a week. It's like, okay, if you were to tell me I want to maximize, like, get the biggest squat in next year, there's no way I'm going to tell you to squat once a week, right? So it's like, what would I actually do for somebody coming to me? And if somebody came to me and said, hey, I want to maximize my health and longevity, there's no way I'm going to say do no cardio. Like there's just, and I'm not saying it's going to make the biggest impact in the world, but
Yeah.
I do think there is sufficient evidence to show that there are extra benefits to dedicated cardiovascular activity.
Yeah, and actually, come to think of it, it's partly for health and partly for enjoyment, but it's partly just for functionality. It's partly just like in case shit went down and I had to run for Vietnam quick, if I got to get out fast, your boy got to be able to run for some distance. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Plus, where you
Uh,
are, you're going to stand out. So you got to be really fast, or else everybody's
I
going
gotta
to
be,
notice.
I gotta be flash status for sure. And I don't think 20 rep squats are quite gonna do it. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, I had to focus on that a little bit, just for preparatory purposes. Yeah.
sure. You had mentioned before how when you were 6 years into training, it's not like your training was bad. And that's kind of what I suspected as well. Because I do find that there are some people who say, and I'm not saying you have done this, but maybe lean towards doing this, where some people will say, well, I've been training for 8 years, but only like two was good, or I've really only been training for two. And it's like, look, even if you're training decently, you're still
Yeah.
making gains those first few years. They still count.
Yeah.
If a client comes to me and they say, hey, I did CrossFit for 5 years, but I've only really been lifting for one. So that means like I've got all of my progress left, right? It's like, no, you definitely just,
Yeah.
even sports to some degree. Like if you wrestled for five
Yeah.
years, you have absolutely gained muscle, right? I mean, so I'm just curious, what are the big, because you undeniably have still made fantastic progress since, let's say, year 6. What were some of those big changes that you think you made, other than just obviously going for longer?
So a lot of it was keeping more consistency with the movements in the plan and not just, swapping them in and out or like random training or like training by instinct. Like,
Okay.
I mean, that is not going to be great for most people, and it certainly wasn't great for me. I would say I definitely went through a phase where I was doing like mind muscle connection, bro bodybuilding, sort of fluff and pump, squeeze, contraction, all that kind of shit. Um, I wouldn't say it was a waste, but like it definitely didn't do much. And then there was a phase in 2019 where I was doing ridiculous volume, and I'll just say that I survived, but I didn't thrive. Like it
Mm.
was just, if people see my workouts now and they're like, "That's high volume." Well, I was doing probably twice as much.
Wow.
I was doing like 50, 60, 70 sets of workout in some cases.
Wow.
Um, and maybe
So
like that was a base that you could use for later training or like transition or something. But I don't know. I think it was just excessive. I think it's just too much. Um,
what's
and
your
then in 2020,
weekly
I did
set
some.
volume similar now, like these days per body part?
Um, I actually stopped formally tracking
Okay.
um, because I didn't find that it was useful. And that
Hmm.
might sound a little bit silly, but I would just start chasing. Right? It would just become a number to try to beat next week or next month.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's what happened before, right? And so for a while, I actually didn't track it. And then I tracked it. I added, because I still write it down, right? I didn't add it up because the process of adding it up made me want to add even more, right? Um, so I added it up because people were asking me about it last year. Um, and so maybe I'll add it up again at some
Yeah.
point just to see what I've been doing over the past few months. Um, and so, yeah, that has been helpful, kind of getting away from super focused on volume. Um, I would say exercise selection actually was a big one as well,
Okay.
um, where I was doing fairly minimalistic training. Um, and I was doing just a few movements per movement pattern, and they actually weren't that good movements for the areas that I wanted to develop. Like not a lot of arm work, and I think all the only hinges was doing were sumo deadlifts and back extensions. I could actually check in my page and going by memory. I was only doing sumo deadlifts and back extensions for hinges, nothing else. So no RDLs, no good mornings, no stiff legged deadlifts, no hamstring curls, nothing like that. For squats, all I was doing were occasional front squats, and then high bar back squats, and then high bar pause squats. No leg press. My gyms didn't have a leg press.
Yeah.
Like a lot of gyms just didn't have equipment that I
Interesting.
went to back
What's
then.
that recent leg press? I saw the post you tagged me in. Was that a new one you were adding to the mix?
Was it the V squat, like the machine squat?
You had posted and you said you're going to try this out, and you said not as long as Dave McConey. Those who know that one.
It was either the leg press or the machine squat.
It was a leg press. I was just wondering, was that just, were you doing anything specific with it, or was it just that you're adding in a leg
Uh,
press now?
I was doing like partials at the
Okay.
bottom.
Gotcha.
But I wasn't measuring as exactly like it wasn't as long term of a experiment as you've done.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I got that part. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. So I'll maybe be trying out those leg press partials,
Okay. The partials aspect.
but they're pretty brutal. Because the sticking point is halfway up
Yeah.
in the leg press, similar to a squat, right? And so you're trying to push as hard as you can, but if you push too hard, it goes up past the sticking point. It gets
Right.
easier.
Yeah.
Again, right? Like if you imagine doing half rep squats in the bottom position,
Oh yeah.
you'll see what a lot of people do is they push up just high enough where they can kind of chill. Because you can chill at a quarter squat with a ton of weight, right? Anyone can quarter squat more than they can full squat, and even half squat a lot. So they'll go up to like where they can chill, probably like right around here.
Right.
And they'll do these reps where they're kind of just chilling at the top. And then if they have to catch their breath and rebrace, they'll chill at the top and rebrace, chill at the top. So I think it's kind of just the same as a normal rep, because like this last little part, I mean, it's like,
right. Well, yeah, just to clarify for people listening who don't have the visual, when you say quarter, you mean going up to a quarter squat, which in the context of partials is 3/4 of the way up, not that bottom quarter squat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you're doing like a leg press partial, if you push too hard, you go too high up.
Right.
And thus you can kind of just take a break at the top, even momentarily, which I think changes it. So you have to push hard enough from the bottom to get just to the sticking point and kind of like push at the sticking point and then resist it on the way down and push up towards the sticking point, but not too hard, not too much, because then you go beyond it. So I don't know how good they'll be for partials. Because with a row, you can just pull as hard as you damn well can from the very start of the rep. And you'll probably hit technical failure on rep 5 of a 15 rep set, just because you're not going to get fully retracted.
Right.
It's like the top of a calf raise. You're not going to get you've talked about this. You don't get all the way up under your ballerina tippy toes.
Yeah.
So you can go as hard as you want on calf raises or shrugs or rows, like any of these clearly end range, most challenging movements. You can just go hard from the first moment, the first rep, just as hard as you can. But with a squat or even like a bench press or a press where the sticking point is somewhere in the middle, it's not at the very top. You have to, I don't know if they're suitable, because if the whole point of training and activating motor units and training the muscles is to push hard. It's to get those super high levels of effort that actually activate the muscles. And I think if you're kind of holding back because you don't want to push through that sticking point, I think it kind of defeats the whole point of it.
I think
I don't know. The stretch might be worth it.
Yeah. So calves, for people who haven't seen the video, the calves example I've mentioned a few times is just that a lot of these people who I've seen say, oh, 4 range of motion. And it's like almost nobody does true 4 range of motion on calves because end range of motion. And with traps, right? It's that last few inches for a shrug is so much weaker than the first half, right? And the same thing with calves. Like, so if anybody wants to experiment, just go on your tiptoes on a stair or something with both feet and go as high as you possibly can. Even if you add like a 50-pound dumbbell, it's very unlikely you're going to get to that same range of motion.
I can barely do it with my leg sitting down.
Yeah.
So
right.
I don't train calves very much, but like, it's just so much different than walking, and you never train that part of the range of motion. Like ballerinas might actually be good at it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But most of us aren't ballerinas. And so even if you do, it just limits the weight so much as well. So I don't, it's one of those things where even a bench press, right? Like a bench press is a partial, a barbell bench press, right? Because you're not taking you're not like ending up over here.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Like you're finishing here, and that's probably about half the range of motion.
Yeah.
Roughly. Yeah. And it's the length in half. So
did you just say you don't train your calves much, Jeff?
Yeah. I mean, they're still 17 inches.
Yeah, I don't understand. It's almost as if there's some other influence there. Besides
hamstring curls, Nordic hamstring curls, running probably actually helped as well.
Yeah, that is one thing, and it's actually interesting on like the argument of I've seen a couple people what's his name? He's the researcher with your similar name. I'm totally blanking on it. Brad Schoenfeld. Yeah, like Brad Schoenfeld have had that paper, or calves are no more genetic, and we could that could be a whole conversation. But one thing I will say is I think that because they are used so frequently, and somebody commented on this too, that they are just potentially closer to whatever their genetic limit would be, just at baseline before you're actually dedicated to lifting. I mean, I've seen tons of cyclists and runners with great calves, and just, especially if they're at a heavier body weight. And so that is, I think, one reasonable argument for it is just that daily, I mean, thousands and thousands of reps, going all the time.
I think there's probably some genetic component still though, because I mean, I
Oh
live in
yeah,
China
sure.
and I see some fucking honkers of calves. Like
Asian calves, man. That's just
you
the
could
thing.
take a bite out of those and they'd still have a bunch to spare. Man, I've seen some beautiful calves here. Um, and I doubt they're doing calf raises. In fact, a lot of women, they they actually get a surgery where
Yeah,
they cut part of, I guess they cut a nerve to one of the muscles in the calves.
I've seen
Um,
that, which is
Except
crazy.
it kind of it's not I don't do this if someone's wondering about this, because it can result in problems and nerve related issues. And yeah, I think embrace your big wonderful beautiful calves, Asian women of the world.
Yes.
They're succulent. I love them. We all love them. They're fantastic. So don't do anything drastic. You're beautiful the way you are.
I mentioned a few times that for me to truly do the experiment where I just don't train one calf at all,
You have no
so well that yeah, I could administer Botox to the calf
right,
muscle,
right.
which I do in my practice, not the calf muscles, but to master muscles and temporalis muscles and whatnot. So
Access.
if I really wanted to do that, I certainly could, but I think I think I'll avoid
Donate
that
your
one.
body. Donate
Yeah,
your body to science. Be like that Brian Johnson guy or
yeah, yeah.
whatever.
I did remember what I was going to mention though regarding it's kind of two things related to health span. So one is you talked about this reserve, right? You have the maybe muscle memory from running. I think there's a lot to be said for doing things at the appropriate time in your life. And if
Yeah.
you're 45, I hate to say that you missed your window to put on a lot of muscle. I'm definitely not saying that because I think you can still put on a lot of muscle later on in life. However, I don't think somebody who's just getting started at 40 is ever going to reach the same muscularity as if you started at 20.
Yeah, I don't
Same
think so.
thing with probably any sort of athletic performance for sure. And I think there is something to be said for if you're starting at a young age, getting to this, especially with muscle mass. I mean, cardiovascular conditioning can drop off pretty quickly, but if you're gaining as much muscle as you can in your 20s, maybe even 30s, and then at that point, with the understanding that you're not going to keep gaining so much more, you can kind of just bank that and have that reserve and then focus more on mobility and conditioning and everything as you get older. And thankfully, you've kind of already put in that time to maintain that muscle.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be jacked my whole life, right? And even if I, because you have momentum as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just then you build up the habits as well, and just the psychology of it. So once you put in between 5 and 10 years, I would say, and yeah, the best time to put in that time of building your physique is probably your 20s. I was kind of a late starter. I started at 25, but I don't think that's too late. But yeah, if I think into your 30s, I think that's when the clock is ticking.
Yeah.
We hear about like the clock is ticking for women in their 30s, but like I think for men as well, if you wanna get swole, the clock
Yeah.
is ticking a little bit as well, or at least maximally swole.
Yeah.
And so, I think sometimes people focus so much on their career for the first education, and then it's career, and then it's and that's a big process. And then they get to like 40ish. They're like, oh yeah, I should probably take care of myself at some
Yeah.
point, right? Like that's the thing. And it's just hard to claw all that back. Like if you take a year off training or 2 or 3 years off, let's say you trained in high school then you come back to it after college. Like you can get back to it fairly quickly. I've seen that.
Yeah.
But then later in life, it does become more difficult. And most of the, impressive older physiques that I see, and there are some, guys who are 50 and 55, even 60 and still pretty jacked naturally, they never stopped. Never stopped.
Yeah.
They didn't have even a month off was inconceivable. Even a week off was like, they just, even every day. So when people are like, you shouldn't train every day, well, like, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world if you balance it correctly, right? And of course, you can still make gains on like 3 or even 2 days a week, as long as you're nailing those 2 or your 3 days.
Yeah, sure.
Right? If you're the kind of person where you miss a day and then it sort of spirals into not going for a week and then a month, yeah, maybe training every day and just having it be there every day is not a bad idea. And so, yeah, whatever it takes to be consistent and to try to get that in your life as early as possible. Because you can kind of claw it back later, but it's difficult.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned career too, and you don't want to obviously have your body, lose health, or you don't want to have a great career at the expense of your health. But also, I think you could still apply those similar principles to your career in other areas. And by that, I mean, there's some of this, I don't know, FOMO and stuff that people, I saw one Twitter post, somebody sent me that. I commented on it in my podcast with Brian a while back when we talked about him being 40. And this person was saying, when you're 20, just like take all these trips, don't work. Who cares when you're going to be 40 anyway? Because who even cares about being 40? And I was like, what? Like, it was like the worst post I've ever seen. And it's like, look, I am strongly in favor of utilizing your youth to have good experiences and all that. That's wonderful. But you can't deny that setting yourself up really happens in your even teens. I mean, like, that's one of the problems with like high school. I mean, I look at some people I went to high school with, and it's like, there is nothing now at 32 that these people could do other than, getting extremely lucky with maybe a career move to ever get to where I am going to be in my career and financially and whatnot, simply because the decisions were not made. Yeah, there's not the time, but also it's just not. People who are in their 30s generally are not then going to, let's say, go back to college and take courses and then go to med school or dental school or something. Like, the career path is set. And I would say even at an unfortunately young age. I mean, really, you got to be 18 and decide to some degree what you want to do. So I'm not trying to say
it's crazy how we have to decide our whole lives in some way that early. I mean, most 18-year-olds are idiots in some way or another. I was. Yeah. It's like, it's just part of being an 18-year-old. I think, especially an 18-year-old man. Like,
definitely,
you're not even thinking about 10 years, let alone 5 years, like 50 years. I mean, it's just like you have no idea. And so, yeah, sometimes I wish maybe you could delay college. Like, maybe that's actually not a bad idea to travel a little bit and start college at 22 or 23. Because I know a lot of guys who weren't really ready for college at 18, 19.
And that's the thing, right? Like, I think a lot of people maybe mentally aren't ready, but the way we are just set up, that's very out of the norm. And most people don't want to be, when your friends are now working and everything, do you want to now be starting school with a bunch of freshmen? And like, we kind of have this format. I'm not saying you couldn't do it. I'm not saying, hey, like, if you have dreams and you're 28 and you want to go back to school, that's amazing. If you're 50 and you want to put on muscle, 100% you can do it. Like, I'm not trying to say it in a negative way. I'm just saying that there is a lot to be said for grinding in your early years, not to the point that you don't have a life, not to the point that, your health is going badly or anything like that, but maximizing muscle mass and everything, maximizing like career potential. Because you look at somebody like Brian Borstein's a good example. He worked really hard. He kind of set himself up with his gym and the fitness world. And now he can be 40 and have a ton of muscle mass and kind of, I don't want to say coast in his career, but I mean, he's even talked like he doesn't have to work as hard as he did. I'm currently grinding very hard, but hopefully that's not the same forever. And I'm just saying, like, the topic of setting yourself up for later is just very interesting. And there is a time limit there.
There is, yeah. And I think late 20s to early 30s is when you kind of have to get your shit together as a man.
Yeah.
Like, if you're, I noticed this as I was an English teacher. And there's nothing wrong with being an English teacher in China, but especially if you're just in the public school system, there's kind of like there's no progression. Like
Hmm.
you're just the foreign teacher. You're not going to become the principal of a Chinese school, right?
Right, right,
It's not going to happen, right?
right.
It's literally impossible. And maybe if you're in some kind of organization, you can climb the ladder there. But you tell people, oh, like I'm 21, 22, teaching English. Oh, cool. Like that's cool. Like 24, 25, I'm teaching English. All right, yeah, right on. And then it's like 26, 27, 28, 29. I'm teaching English, and they're like, all right, well, where do you see this going? And they're just
Yeah,
kind of like, you're just kind of like, well, I don't know. I wasn't really thinking about where it was going. I was just sort of doing it. And so, I see a lot of young men, and not as young, but still kind of young men. Because at 28, you're kind of young, but you're not young, young,
yeah, for
right? Like
sure.
if you're 18 and you haven't found yourself, good, right? Like that's normal. And even if you're 21, 22, 23, but every year you add another digit to that 20 something, I think it changes a little bit. And like the perception of where you should be is different. And that's a good thing, right?
Yeah,
Because you should be progressing. You should be doing something either in a company and, climbing the ladder or doing your own thing. But there should be some kind of progression. And I think if you're doing the same thing year after year after year, as I was, because it was comfortable,
yeah,
right? It wasn't a job I hated. That was the issue. It was a job that I tolerated and it was
hmm,
okay. It was comfortable. And so, you know, and I know that if I was still teaching now, I would be very miserable.
yeah,
And that's not to say anything, bad about people who are still teaching English. If you really enjoy it, it's the right thing for you. And again, if there's no progression, but you really enjoy it, and you're happy with that, it's fine. But I think a lot of guys, they want to be more driven than they are, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah.
And so they're not as happy. They're not happy with where they are, and so they're miserable. And they need to do something about it. Damn it!
Right. Well, yeah, you don't want to be the oldest guy at a frat party. You don't want to be the oldest guy at the bar or any
There
of
we
that
go.
stuff. I'm sure we're sending a lot of people into an existential crisis right now. A lot of men in their mid to late
Good.
20s are right. Wake
Good.
up call. So related but final topic in as far as like the age and whatnot. Do you see yourself? Because I could see this for myself. Ever getting to the point where you just kind of say, okay, you know what, the peak muscle building phase is kind of over. And not that you're not going to still try for it, but sometimes we see this progression with people where they maybe drop out of the natural bodybuilding scene a little bit. And now it's like, whether it's like calisthenics, they're maintaining that leaner physique for health. And I think that's kind of an appealing thing. Again, I don't know how I will eventually go to that, but there's a guy at my gym who's got to be like 60 and he's peeled and like it's just like it's a good look.
Yeah.
And he's not trying to be bulked up 20% at 60 years old powerlifter anymore. He's just embracing, that health aspect.
Yeah. I think that's a natural progression. I think, yeah, the time to bulk is probably in your 20s and maybe 30s. If a 40-year-old comes to me and they're like, yeah, man, I'll do whatever it takes. I want to bulk up and I want to build a lot of muscle. A lot of me is like, hold on a second. Like, do you even know what you're asking in terms of like, because I think, yeah, at that point, maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if someone is like, 18, 19 years old, and they're like, man, I want to go into a 400 calorie surplus, I'm much more inclined to be like, yeah, that makes sense. You're 130 pounds or whatever. You want to get big. Like, yeah, hell yeah. But I think the older you get, the less viable that is, and the less it just makes sense. As for me, I just look at it as like a trade off, right? Because there's going to be a point when I bulk up and then I cut down, and there's just like, well, I think I gained a pound or two. And I think at that point, you have to sort of weigh those things. And it's like, okay, well, is it worth trying another bulk and cut and doing things differently to see if like I could net some gains that way? But I think there's also nothing wrong with just sort of maintaining 12% or so. Like I think for me that would be fine. You know, probably 200, low 200s, so like 205 maybe. Um, and you know, focusing on other things on performance. Like that's the time when I would be more interested in powerlifting. I get asked about that a lot.
Oh,
Like, oh,
really?
when are you going to do a powerlifting meet? Oh, when are you going to max out and do a bench cycle? I get people sending me bench cycles. Like,
Really?
I wrote GBS. I wrote you a bench cycle. Get this shit out of here. What are you doing? I don't do that shit. But I might do that later when like muscle mass is kind of just like
Interesting.
man, right? It's not like I would give up on muscle mass, but I think realistically, if there's not that much more to gain, you know, maybe I'll just focus on other stuff, calisthenics, cardio. Um, I actually filmed a video called Bodybuilding Side Quests a
Hmm.
while ago. I filmed it
Oh,
like
cool.
6 months ago. I just haven't edited it.
Oh, it's not posted. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
It's not posted. It's on my computer. It's been there. Oh God, it's been there since before the cut. I think
Oh,
it's been there
wow.
for like a year or something. Um, and maybe I'll post it. But it'll be weird because I have like a different beard and stuff.
I was gonna say, yeah, you're gonna look.
This guy just time travels, man. No, but maybe I'll film an interesting intro where I'm like time travel or something.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I had a whole bunch of ideas, like maybe combat sports. I think that's one I might be leaning towards. Just
Of
because I
getting
think,
into
yeah, just like jujitsu or not professionally or anything, just like fucking around,
Jeff's in
Um,
the octagon.
yeah, I mean, I just from a usefulness perspective, I think that's running is
I was
useful.
gonna say this way, if you get caught on your way to Vietnam, then at least you can
Yeah.
maybe get out of it.
Now, you hear about the fight or flight response. I can do either one in
There
that
you
case,
go.
right? Like
Right.
it's sort of up to me. I've had the flight for a while, but I think having both is
Yeah.
probably a good idea. Because I don't know how to fight. Like people are like, man, you must be fucking deadly. No, what? No, not at all. I don't know. I just poke people or something.
I've been trying
That
to
could be
challenge Kino Body to a charity MMA match for a while. He hasn't taken me up on it, so one day.
parody mud wrestling or something. No, maybe combat sports, maybe more cardio, calisthenics, maybe powerlifting at that point. Because once you've built all the muscle, I think that's where like transitioning it into strength, you know, would make sense. Like you're done on one goal. Like I'm very focused on one goal at a time. That's just how my brain works,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. But just sort of latching onto one thing. So that's why I haven't made a video on hybrid training. I've never done hybrid training in my life. I just have these leftovers from when I was a runner, and occasionally I, see how fast I could run half a mile or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It's
so
interesting that
yeah,
you would go towards because I think both of those are natural progressions. I've seen obviously plenty of people go from bodybuilding to jujitsu. We've seen a lot of that in recent years. And powerlifting, I think, makes sense because it's another way to progress, even though you might not be gaining more
sure.
muscle. I think I personally would lean away from both just because they're both substantially more injury prone than bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't do calisthenics really much at all. But I
That's a good
find that,
option.
what's that?
That's a good option. Yeah, ring training. It's
Yeah,
just
there's a lot of untapped potential there where it's like, look, I might not gain any muscle, but if I can lose some body fat, I'll get better at those things. And there's still a skill component to it. And you don't hear about too many calisthenic injuries. So as kind of going with that longevity aspect, it kind of seems to be a natural progression there.
that makes a lot of sense because it's almost like the opposite of powerlifting. Because powerlifting to optimize your performance, especially for bench, yeah, it's like eat a lot of food, get big, etc. But
Yeah.
calisthenics is the opposite, right? So you want to sort of lean down. Plus, it actually does work the abs quite a bit. So, you'll actually see the abs when you lean down. And man, calisthenics athletes, they look fucking amazing. They
Yeah.
look great.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good look. And if my 26-inch legs shrink down to 23, like I'm not attached to how I look, right? Like I don't really care that much or care as much as people think I
Well,
should
you
or would.
also, I think you're fortunate in that you know, like I think of certainly myself with very long limbs and kind of like lanky appearance and everything. And like if I lose a little bit of muscle, it's like, all right, I'm going to look pretty lanky. Whereas you could still lose quite a bit of muscle. And with your not only just overall muscle mass, but your shape, if you
Right,
become a
yeah.
calisthenics bro, you're just going to be a super aesthetic calisthenics bro. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where, yeah, I think especially with the waist size, um, and then with the arm insertions, as well as the traps, yeah, like I mean, I could probably go distance run for a year and still have traps. I had
Right.
traps before I ever lifted a single fucking weight.
Yeah.
Like they're just, I think they're just genetic. Like I've seen some family members, they just insert really high up,
Right. Right.
which it's like a sail, you know, like the sail of a ship. If one end attaches really high, it's just a bigger muscle,
Yeah.
right? Like you have the jib or whatever it's called, and then the mast,
Yeah.
and then the sail is in between. So if you have a really tall mast or a really long jib, the sail it's just a triangle, right? So it's just going to be bigger.
Yeah.
So you know because of the high attachment, like some people have big traps, but they don't have the high attachment, so you can't even
Hmm.
see them from the front,
Right.
right? And so they have traps; they're just sort of hidden.
Hidden. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I try to be like transparent about some areas that I don't have like some magical trap building method or something. Like there's no trap ebook coming
Yeah.
out.
Right. Right.
Oh yeah, buy my trap ebook or something. No,
Right.
that's just that's the kind of thing where I can be specific and just say like, yeah, that's just genetic. Like when someone's like, how can I get your traps? Time machine, different parents or
Yeah.
something. I don't know. Like I don't know how that would work. You'd be a different person, but
Yeah,
so
it's
yeah.
almost like Ben Pakulski's calf and leg book that he put out is
Oh god,
well, yeah,
not a huge fan of his.
yeah. So all right, man. Well, I think we touched on everything I wanted to bring up. I definitely when I put that video out, like I said, maybe we could do a roundtable soon, get all the guys together. That'd be good.
Yeah.
Cool, cool. So where can people find you?
Just Jeffrey Verity Schofield or GVS on YouTube, and then Instagram. I actually haven't posted on Instagram in like 3 or 4 months. I got out of the habit
Oh,
of
like
that.
stories and stuff.
Yeah, it's all stories. So
Yeah,
I'll
let's
post
see.
probably 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stories during a workout. Just those are pretty easy to put out. You know, it just takes a few minutes. Sometimes I do a voiceover, just show some stats, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Cool, man.
Instagram, and then-
All right. Well, we will have all that below, and we'll talk soon.
cool. Thanks for having me.